Hi there. I'm going to tell you my story about the morning I woke up and took a trip to the other side of the veil with my grandma. Let me start off by saying she was my favorite person in the whole world. She was my woman, and she passed away, and I was devastated. And one of the things that hurt me the most was that she never got to see my home or my garden before she passed away, which she was the inspiration for what I did in my home and garden. I went to bed, woke up, and it was like someone turned the sun on in my face. And I'm holding my hands up super bright, and all of a sudden I hear her voice coming from the hallway. And I creep down to the end of my bed. I look down the hallway, and she's standing in my bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror, fluffing her hair. And she says, "Hello, would you like to go out to eat and then go to Cedar Point?" And I said, "Sure, okay, let's go." Like that, I went from my bedroom to sitting inside her little blue Saturn, driving down the road. And if you know, you know, we were at the corner of Front and Main Street at a red light. And she says, "You know what? I'm sorry. We're not going to have time. We're going to have to skip Cedar Point, but I'd like to take you to my house. I need to show you something." And I said, "Sure." I knew sitting there that she was dead, and I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want it to end. So again, boom, we went from sitting at the red light. Now I'm standing in the middle of her living room. And she says, "I have to tell you something." And I said, "Okay." She was sitting on her couch, and across the room, her sister, my Aunt Ruth, was sitting there too. And she says, "Can you believe that it took me dying to find out that Helen has hated me for 25 years?" And I said, "Helen, what does she have to do with this?" And by the way, Helen is Aunt Ruth's best friend. So I said, "Okay, what about Helen?" And my grandma just gestures over towards her television. She wanted me to look at her television. I look at the television, and in the TV screen is Helen's face and her orange lipstick. And she's running her mouth. I can't hear anything, just her mouth running. And on the other side of the TV screen is the back of my grandpa's head. And his head is moving, and you could tell that these two were having an argument. I look back at my grandma, and I say, "Grandma, Grandpa and Helen there's something there." And I said, "You know what? I'm going to dip out. I don't want involved. I'm going to let you and Aunt Ruth talk about this. I'm going to go to the kitchen." So I leave the room, and I walk down the kitchen, and again, I knew that I would never see the inside of this house again. So I went to the kitchen, which was somewhere that was very comfortable and safe to me as a child. And I'm standing in the kitchen, and I look out her back window. And like most typical neighborhoods, you have the backyard, a garage, an alley, and then your neighbor's garage, their yard, and the back of their house. Only all of it was gone. It was all forest, and it was on fire. And off in the distance was this man, and he looked real tiny. He was all black, and he was running real fast, and he had a torch in his hand. And he's touching trees and bushes and all the shrubbery and setting everything on fire. And there was just smoke everywhere. I turn around, I run back in the house, and I start yelling, "We have to leave. There's somebody setting fire to everything. We have to go." I run out her front door thinking she and Aunt Ruth will be behind me. And I run outside, and I run across the street, and I start banging on all of her neighbors' doors. "There's a fire. Everybody has to leave. We have to leave." I get down to the end of her block, and the atmosphere changed. It turned black and was real dark and creepy. And everything in me said, "Do not go down this street. Turn around and run." And I could hear someone whistling, an eerie whistle coming from in front of me in this pitch black. I turn around, I run back down the street. I get up underneath a street light, and I'm standing directly across from her house, and I can see through her picture window Grandma and Aunt Ruth having a very serious conversation. And I turn around, and I look back down to the end of the street, and I see this pair of shoes coming from the darkness. And then I see the legs, and then I see the rest of him. And he's standing there, and I'm just staring. He went from the end of the block, and it was so weird. He moved too fast. He was like, shoo, shoo, and then boom, in seconds, we were nose to nose. This man, he looked like he was in his 30s. He had on dress shoes, khakis, a button-down blue dress shirt, and with his 2 fingers, he had a navy blue blazer slung over his shoulder. And we were nose to nose. And he said, "You have to leave." And I said, "I'm not leaving." He said, "Leave now." I said, "No, I'm not going anywhere." He reached out, grabbed my hand, flipped it over, took my two fingers and started bending them. And if you ever pull on that, it hurts way down in here. He was bending my fingers so hard that I had to go up on my tiptoes and lean towards him to let pressure off of my arm. And he started baring his teeth at me and saying, "You can't be here. You need to leave." And me being me, I said, "F you, I'm not going anywhere." And he said, "You cannot be here." And he took his hands and he shoved me. And I went, and I sat up in bed. And it was super bright in my room again. And I thought, am I awake or is this still dreaming? So I crawled down to the end of my bed and I looked towards my bathroom to see if my grandma was still there. She was not. I rubbed my arm for a couple seconds, grabbed my phone, called my mom, because this is my grandma's her mother. I said, "Mom, I got the tea. Grandma just came to visit me, and you are not gonna believe what she told me." And my mom was shocked. She's like, "I don't know anything about Grandpa and Helen." And then I ended up running into Helen, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't ask her. And I did see Aunt Ruth, and I asked her, and she said, "Oh, honey, I don't know anything about that." But I couldn't do it. That's my story. My dead grandma came and picked me up in her little Saturn and drove me to the other side of the veil. I really, really, really want to hear your comments and your thoughts on this. And then also, if you trust me enough to share your story with me and let me tell it, I have some more coming for you, some family friends who have trusted me. They want me to tell their stories too. So I hope you like this.